Now we are going back to our next session. The session title will be Reform and Reality, Bangladesh Changing Political Landscape. We have a wonderful panel. I'm requesting all the panelists to come to stage. I'm announcing their name. Dr. David Jackman, Departmental Lecturer in Development Studies, University of Oxford. Dr. Asif Shahan, who will also present a keynote and moderate the session. Professor, Department of Development Studies, University of Dhaka. We have two other panelists, Tasnim Jara, Joint Convener, NCP, and Mahdi Amin, Advisor to the Chairperson, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, BNP. Thank you.
Welcome everyone. This is the first post-launch session, so I'm guessing that everyone is feeling, I don't know what. I think throughout the morning we have heard a lot of speeches. I think we have heard a lot of critical points. Even though I'm supposed to present a keynote, I'm not going to present a keynote. I'll just talk about the key issues that we are going to discuss. And let's have a discussion here. Let's have a discussion here because as we know that Bangladesh is, we are making this point again and again that the country is going through a critical juncture. There's an opportunity for implementing reform. So we have Dr. David Jackman here, who has been working on Bangladesh's politics for a long period of time. So we will hear from him. And we have two esteemed political leaders with us, Dr. Mahdi Amin and Dr. Tasnim Jara, and who are kind of representing the new generation of politicians and new generation of political thoughts. So since we are talking about reform, I think it will be interesting to listening more from them, and I obviously don't have the capacity to sort of give a keynote speech in front of everyone. So I'm just going to kind of try to set the scene here. So as we all know that even when we talk about the current reform, the current political landscape, somehow we start our story from 2008. But the story of Bangladesh and the story of Bangladesh's struggle with democracy did not necessarily start with 2008. It took a certain turn at that period. But if you really want to understand the challenges, the problems and the issues of democratic reform, we need to go back further behind. Probably we may need to start at one point from the liberation war, that how the political parties try to sort of distribute power among themselves, the political culture that evolved over time. But for now, let's focus on the post-1991 transition. And in 1991, we had what we can say another critical juncture. There was another opportunity to, going through the democratic process. There were aspirations, there were a lot of reform commissions back then, there were a lot of task forces. Unfortunately, what we see over the years that there is a very narrow conception of democracy. Democracy in our context, we have always understood as it's a kind of a representative democracy. Democracy is just about elections, democracy is just about voting, democracy is about ensuring people's right to vote. Well, this is not necessarily wrong. This is absolutely right, absolutely fine. But the problem is the more we have focused on that particular aspect, the more we lose our focus on building institutions, focusing on dealing with the institutional framework, changing the rules of the game, and creating new organizations that will essentially hold the executive accountable. As a result of that, even though we made a transition in 1991, what we have over the years just a change in power in every 5 years. And within those 5 years, there was again concentration of power. There was again attempt to go beyond the rules and making sure that the parties can stay in power over the years. That attempt has always been there. To the credit quote unquote to Awami League, they succeeded in making sure that they can stay in power in 2014 by changing the constitution and by getting rid of caretaker government, and we see what happens. The concentration that was happening, that that reached to a new level, that reached to a new dimension maybe, And at the same time, we have seen that how state machineries were politicized, how the whole state institutions were used to ensure that there can be a dominant party state. Now, if we move to 2024, so there was again an opportunity that took place. And this is important that when we talk about 2024, when we talk about July Uprising, it's important to understand that when the movement was unfolding, at one point, it was simply a demand for quota reservation, but eventually it transformed into a mass uprising where and the demand was not only a change in regime, but also establishing a new political system. And the government that came into power recognized that. It established at first 6 reform commissions, and then there were 5 more, 11 reform commissions in total, and there were some task forces. And from the main 6 reform commissions, based on that, we sort of developed a consensus commission, which tried to deal with 166 recommendations. And based on those recommendations, there were a lot of discussions that were held. We now have a July Charter, which has been prepared after discussions, but even within that July Charter, there are few missing points. There are, in some cases, when we talk about checks and balances, we have seen that we actually failed to reach to a consensus in many cases. There are areas where we had consensus. We have some consensus in case of, Article 70, even though there is a note of dissent there. We have some consensus on, regarding the term limit of the Prime Minister. But at the same time, we did not necessarily reach a consensus about having an upper house where proportional representation, will be ensured. We did not necessarily reach a consensus about, more importantly, having the oversight institutions to be independent. There are note of dissents there. But most importantly, what happened is we have missed a lot of points. For instance, when we talk about political parties and political institutions, so far we have not essentially introduced any reform in political party finance system, to introduce internal democratic practices within the political party, and we have not necessarily taken any preventive measures so that the political parties do not necessarily get into violent activities. The issue of citizens' engagement in the policy making has largely remained absent. The public sector, the public bureaucracy has not necessarily been come under focus. So there were a lot of missing points there. So this is where we are. It's not that we have completely failed. There are some successes, but as a pessimist observer of the Bangladesh politics, sometimes we may wonder at some point whether we have achieved what we are promised to get at August 5. So within this background, let's start our discussions. Let's start our discussions, and we will talk about those reform initiatives. We will talk mostly about the political culture that we had, which we identified as confrontational, which we identified that kind of facilitated political crimes and violences. And we will also talk about the political systems and where those reform initiatives were directed to make those changes. So I want to start with Professor David Jackman, Dr. David Jackman. I want to start with you. You have been working on Bangladesh politics for a while, and you specifically focus on political violence and crimes. So you are a master of that. You understand, to some extent that, how the political parties have used violence, sometimes through intermediaries, dalal, and as you say, boro bhai, in some cases. And that has kind of been a norm, and you have also observed that that there was some certain variation within that under Awami League regime. So as we are sitting here in 2024, based on your understanding and based on your observations, if we try to change that, we cannot actually eliminate that, but try to limit it. In your opinion, what are the areas that we should focus? What are the areas of focus for the reform initiative should be?
Well, some very challenging, wonderful questions. It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the organizers. I want to just make a few sort of basic observations about Bangladesh's politics to try and set the scene a little. Now, there are, of course, many different ways that you can approach and understand and build an understanding of Bangladeshi politics. And part of the approach that I take is very simple, okay? It's more bottom-up. And it's quite simply to observe Bangladeshi politicians and try to understand what makes a successful politician in Bangladesh. Okay? Now, we can't paint or sort of tarnish all politicians in Bangladesh with the same brush. Okay? What makes a successful politician in Bangladesh differs, and there's very interesting questions about how and why it differs between places and over time. But I think we can certainly see a trend. Okay? So a politician recently said to me that in Bangladesh you need three things to succeed. Okay? You need Gunda, Honda, and Dhaka. Okay? You need muscle, you need to show strength, and you need money. Now, why there is so much of this in Bangladesh's politics is a very big question with lots of complex answers. It's clear that politics in that respect is very similar to many places across the world. And part of the story is certainly that many politicians want to enrich themselves. That's undeniable. But part of the story also is that when many politicians look around them, every direction they look, they need money and they need muscle to succeed. Okay? So when many politicians look up within a political hierarchy, it's very clear that they need money. Okay? To be taken seriously, they need to show muscle. Okay? They need to dominate. Sometimes they will need money to buy a party nomination. That's when politicians look up. When politicians look down, they also see that they need money. Okay? Money in elections for organizing campaigns, sometimes for inducing or compensating voters for their time. And they also knew that they need to keep activists on their side, and these activists need to be rewarded. So then how do politicians accrue that money? Okay? Now, one way is through forming syndicates. Okay? Accruing money illicitly, coercively. Now, we all know this means many different things, but at the local level, I would argue that the most common form of syndicate we see across Bangladesh is chandabaji. Okay? Now, when we study chandabaji before and after the 5th of August, we see a profound consistency in these basic political forms. Okay? Syndicates today are still ubiquitous. Where they were once controlled by one party before August 5th, now they're controlled by a different party or different parties afterwards. So the question this then raises is, if Bangladeshi politics is built on this political economy, then to what extent and in what ways can macro political change really filter down and change the basic structure of politics, okay? And so that's a complex question. Yeah? But if I were to highlight two things, I'll answer two things. Yeah, two things. And these are the sort of elephants in the room, I would say. Number one is party financing and party democracy. Number two is bureaucratic recruitment, promotions, transfers. Okay. We obviously very clearly need to shift the incentives for politicians, for bureaucrats, and then comes the question of how that's done. It's a very complex question. It's about disciplining. It's about accountability, for example, through social media, the capacity for the excesses of politicians to be exposed publicly and the pressure that can bring. It's clearly about the internal dynamics within parties, how party nominations are won, and then it's about the incentives of bureaucrats and how they seek promotions and how they get promotions.
Let me just stop you here. I will come back to you. And I want to reach out to Dr. Mahdi, Amin. And as Dr. Jackman was talking about, I want to focus first on this basic change in political culture. Not political culture, more in terms of, okay, I'll give that to you. So, yeah. In terms of party finance, and more importantly, it's related with internal party, democratic changes and others. And as we have seen that if we look to the Reform Commission reports, other than probably Electoral System Reform Commission, none of them have tried to sort of, address those questions, and even those options were extremely, extremely limited. So, considering the biggest party right now in Bangladesh, so how are you really, are there any kind of new approach, new thinking regarding party finances? Because as we know, as David was talking about, the extortion, chadabaji, which has kind of become widespread and which creates a problem for all the parties eventually. And that creates a lot of problem in the political violence and others. So I'm just wondering that even though the Reform Commission reports did not focus on that much, what is your plan, and what is you are doing right now to address that particular concern?
Thank you. Thanks a lot for organizing this very relevant event, and a lot of youth in the audience that we really appreciate. The aspiration of the youth we saw in last year's July Uprising. That's how the country should move forward. In terms of the party structure, probably you have seen post 5th August, within BNP, a lot of committees have come up in local level through grassroots empowerment where there is direct voting. So in the Jela level, Upojela level, union level, we have different BNP and organizations committees that have come through internal election, through voting, which is democratization within the party structure. It's taking time, of course, if we see on the national level, because we remain a party where over 6 million people have been subjected to fabricated cases during last 15 years when there was Sheikh Hasina as the autocrat ruling the country. So when a party has been subjected to over 6 million people in fake cases, it means probably the party's strength will be way above 8 or 9 million people. It's difficult to get everybody within our finance structure, but it doesn't mean we are in denial. We also believe that should be the way forward. We are trying to come up with some mechanism, how we can do it, based on trial and run. But in terms of democratization within the party, we're going for elections. And when the issue was raised by Chadabaji, right? Of course, it applies to all political parties and stakeholders, but from BNP side, we can ensure we remain as the only party where there is no degree of impunity. We saw 16 years of Army League rule where there was absolute impunity, no legal action, no party action. And as a complete departure in this fresh Bangladesh, what we have done, every time there is an accusation, there is an allegation, we are doing internal party investigations. Over 2,000 people of BNP have been expelled or taken party action. But of course, there is a degree of misinformation campaign as well that we need to admit. There is a degree of disinformation campaign as well. Lots of allegations come. Some of them are found true, and every time there is truth, we are taking actions. We want to build a country where, because of difference in perspectives, we don't come up with allegations. We need to form this country together, build this country together, and I think it should start with a new culture where whoever does or whoever engages or indulges in criminal activity must come to extreme punishment.
Can I just stop here for just one moment, because there's a follow-up question. I understand that, and I will come back to you about this question again. I understand the BNP's commitment and at the same time the actions or activities that BNP is taking internally. I completely understand that. But at the same time, when it comes down to changing the rules of the game, the constitutional reforms and others, we have seen that in many cases BNP has some reservations, right? There are, when it comes to, and you have that, idea that when it is more about, some of the reforms will make the executive's job very difficult. And based on that, in terms of, appointment in the independent bodies, there was kind of a objection, or maybe, you are thinking it differently. So it's good that BNP is trying that, but isn't it better to have the entire rules change so that you are actually forced, it's not just, on your goodwill that we will depend in future, but the rules actually force the party to behave in a certain way. Won't that be a better approach?
I absolutely agree and take a lot of pride because of the fact that BNP is the party which for the first time proposed all the rule changes that we're discussing today. No other party, I'm reiterating it, no other party proposed a complete strict structure, complete reformation policy than BNP. In 2016, I don't know if you have read it, we proposed a Vision 2030. In 2016, every discussion that we have now, whether it's bicameral legislature, the term of the Prime Minister, how we're going to balance the power between the Prime Minister and the President, the power balance between Prime Minister, Executive, Judiciary, how we're going to do the restructure of law enforcement agencies. All these were covered in Vision 2030, and the subsequent version that we saw in 2022, the 27 point, and in 2023, the 31 point. So I would encourage, if we read the entire journey of 2030 vision, which we announced in 2016, in 2022, we announced 27-point charter, and in 2023, we announced 31-point charter. I think every area of debate that we have now, those who are raised, they are covered in those reform plans that we extended. Of course, there is difference. The inherent difference is in terms of methodology. So we, for the first time, said we need a bicameral legislature. Now, whether it's going to be in PR or whether it's going to be seat-based proportion, there is debate, and that will be debate. At the same time, I'm just saying, the tenure of Prime Minister, whether it's more than 2 times or just 2 times, is BNP who coined it for the first time in Bangladesh. So, of course, inherently, we will have diversity, how we're going to implement a particular policy change, and that diversity will exist. Otherwise, we become a one-party state.
Just one-line question. As you say that, there can be debate about it, seat-based or PR. So can we guess that there is an opportunity that BNP may consider this particular position?
We will go through discussions and dialogues, it has been the case.
Okay.
But of course, imposing an idea to any particular party, that's not democracy as well.
Okay.
Ideally, the country that we need to build will have different perspectives, different policies. And that's why we are different political parties. If we all think together in one way, right or wrong, it means that another one-party state. No, the way we're going to see this, in these areas where we all agree, in terms of policies, in terms of reforms, and in terms of methodologies, we all sign. And that's part of the July Charter. Where we'll differ, if there is a perspective where we differ, we diverge, any party can come up with a note of dissent that we don't agree as a political party, and let people choose, let people decide. That's the definition of democracy. We go to the people with our mandate, with our policy proposal, and if the people endorse it, that's how the country should be run.
Absolutely. I hope that you just stay with us for just 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Yeah,
Okay.
10 minutes. And because I want to, come to you, Dr. Jara. 2 questions. First of all, as a new political party, as a new entity, the issues that, Professor Jackman was talking about, what have your party done so far regarding that? And the second thing is, you have heard what Dr. Mahdi Amin was talking about, right? And, he talked about BNP's role, he talked about, and at the same time, more importantly, he pointed out that, it's eventually up to the people, up to the citizens to decide, which particular version of the reform they will choose. What's your objection to that? What's your party's position on that?
Thank you very much, Professor Shahan. Although you said you were not going to do a keynote presentation, but I think you did almost all of it. And I agree that our problems that we are facing are much older than the last 16 years. We are living with increasing returns from the choices we made after 1990, if not from a much earlier period. Which then says that if we want a different future, we would need to reverse the old sequence, and we need to change the incentives that keep reproducing the same politics. Now, what does that mean? It means neutral elections, it means independent referees, it means open civic space, and political parties that are governed in a way that incentivizes or that rewards service, not domination. And we need to build institutions that embed these rules into practice. So I'll start with your second question about reforms. Like Dr. Jackman said, our political culture, unfortunately, is a lot about money and muscle, but I think our population has rejected it at scale. And the manifestation, of course, was in July 2024, where they have clearly said no to this structure of politics. And I think there has been a generational shift, and of course, the uprising was led by young people, but it was joined by people from all walks of life, and they have given a clear verdict that that is not how they want to see politics being done in this country. Now, about reforms, if I take a step back, I mean, we've had a few statements on the reform process. If I take a step back into the process, so there have been 11 commissions plus a few task forces on what kind of reforms can happen in different sectors. But what we've seen is only 6 commissions have been in the purview of Consensus Commission. So that means the other commissions and the task forces, there is no implementation plan for the other commissions. For example, the Health Commission, we don't know what is the implementation plan for that. So is it going to be just on paper or is it going to be in practice? And even for the Consensus Commission, when the political parties came to the dialogue, as somebody who has followed it closely, I think you would know that a lot of them have not been addressed. So we don't have clear implementation pathways for many of the commission reports. Even those who have come to the Consensus Commission, many have been unaddressed. And for those which have been addressed with notes of dissent, we do not have an implementation plan for those as well. While there's an active debate going on in the Consensus Commission whether these reforms would be implemented through say a Constituent Assembly election, giving the next election the elected body status of a Constituent Assembly, that is being actively discussed in the Consensus Commission. We have had our Election Commission, which is operating under the previous rules, declaring an election timeline. So this is utter confusion. So what is going to happen? And there's a sequencing problem there as well. And to the reforms, I think being a political party which has come out of the uprising, we are committed to reforms, and we sincerely believe that this uprising did not happen just for change in the faces in power, but for change in the structure, for change in how the country is run and how the state is run. I will give a specific example about the reform. For example, Dr. Amin said, of course, BNP is a party of reform, and that is excellent. We think that there should be cross-party consensus on the fundamental reforms that needs to happen. But on women's participation in politics, the Reform Commission's proposal was to increase the reserve seats from 50 to 100, which means at least 25% of women will be there in our parliament. And these women would be directly elected from their constituencies rather than the current system of being directly appointed by the political party, which means the women's accountability is to the political party or the leader that is appointing them rather than the people, because they're not coming through direct votes. Now that was the Commission's proposal, and we strongly advocated for it, we supported it, and although this was in BNP's manifesto in 2001 election, where they promised that the women reserved seats in the parliament would come through direct elections, but in 2025 in the Consensus Commission, we lacked support for that. And the process through which the Consensus Commission operated, it was a bit elite-driven, and there was thin citizen participation. When the Election Reform Commission went to the people, did a survey, more than 70% of people supported direct elections for the women's seats. When we campaign, when we speak to people, we've gone across the country last month, there is a palpable appetite for change from people, but there's no way the Consensus Commission can capture this.
Can I just ask one simple question here? I just want to go back to Dr. Mahdi Amin's point, that the point he was making that, you know, eventually BNP has its own version. BNP has its own vision that how it's going to do reform and what's its priority. And the other political parties have their vision. So the argument that he was making, that let the people decide. If they choose this version, they will vote for it and this will be implemented. And if this was not taken, so they will choose a different party. What's wrong with that?
So I think there are a few areas that we need to address. So if we are saying that that will be a regular election, the February election is a regular election, people will not necessarily be voting for, do I want directly elected female representatives in my parliament? It will be a whole package. So people would not individually vote on each reform proposal. They would not be voting for, say, do I want a term limit on the Prime Minister or not? So this is, I think, a different argument than what we are saying. So if we are going to people with each reform proposal, then that means people are deciding on that. Necessarily, that wouldn't happen in a regular election. That is now, the timeline is being set for.
I just have two quick questions, and then we are also, if possible, we'll take some questions. One is, do you have any response to what Dr. Jara was saying? And second, is there, I mean, you have gone through the Reform Commission proposals and others Do you think there are any particular issues that has been missed, that should have been, focused, we should have focused on that particular issue more? And to what extent you are hopeful that what we are achieving right now with all the dissents and all the other issues, will it really change the political landscape of the country in future? Or shall we just go back to 1991, where we'll have election, but within those elections there will be concentration of power? Or will it be even worse than that? I mean, do you think that there will be a significant changes within that?
Thank you. I think the course of the country must change. We should change the political landscape. With that firm belief, we proposed 31 point. When the 31 point was formulated, it was done through consultation with all pro-democracy stakeholders back then. All the pro-democracy parties were consulted. We should be proud, or we should be happy with it, the fact that the 6 reform commissions are named exactly the way those are proposed in our 31 point. Most of the proposals that we discuss in the reform commission are rooted there. Does it mean that we are done with our policy framework or the proposal? No. Again, if you see the course of the BMP in last 1 year, we have gone with the 31 point charter all across the country. We had rounds of consultations and dialogues in the divisional level, in district level, in Upazila level, in union level, in ward level. So every level of the country, within our political party, we did consultation. And in some cases, we had rounds of consultations where we spoke internally, then we asked them to go and engage with the people. Because for whom we are doing all these reforms and policy changes? For the people. So it's not a matter of thing where a certain set of people sit in a drawing room and make a decision. No, that doesn't happen in democracy. Democracy is all about empowering people, understanding that their will and sentiment is reflected in the nation building.
And do you think we have managed to do that? I mean, the reforms and the things that we have done, we have managed to empower people.
More than any other party, for that we have done a lot of work. If you see my work in last 1 year, I've been branded as a guy who was 31 point, right? I've done over 500 meetings myself in just 1 year. Every day, 3 meetings, 4 meetings. That's what we have done. And we're not stick to the 31 point. There are a lot of improvements, some points that will eventually not continue. There will be an awful lot of new points where we're going to focus on. So initially, if you think that 31 point was the electoral manifesto of BMP, no, we're going to have a new manifesto where there will be a reflection of what the people want, and there will be major changes. There will be some structural changes, there will be institutional changes, there will be developmental changes, there will be changes in social policy making. And that, in a sense, shows the power of reform, the power of public engagement. We all sit together, we all have a national consensus, theoretically speaking, and we are done with the reform. Doesn't mean the country becomes static. No change in the subsequent governments, whether it's the next elected government or the next one, or an interim government later down the road. Every time when there is a need of the society, need of the time, demand from the people, they have to have all the changes. That's what we call reforms. All I'm saying, reform is not something that's static, that at some point of time we all sit together and we all agree and that's done. No. As the country moves forward, just like the way elections is a continuous process, never-ending process, reform in itself is a never-ending process. The very best we can do on the grounds where we all agree without imposing or pressurizing somebody, among all the agreement, among all the pro-democracy stakeholders, we sign the July Charter and appreciating the diversity, the different views and perspectives, the different paths across different political parties, we leave it up to different manifesto. That's the reason why we do manifesto.
But then again, there are two things, just two quick things. The first thing is, you're talking about the 31 points again and again, but in your 31 points, you have specifically mentioned about having a parliamentary committee to screen the candidates for different constitutional bodies. You have incorporated this provision, publicly vetting that thing. But in the consensus commission meeting, that particular approach was not necessarily offered. And when we had a discussion about appointing independent appointment in the independent constitutions, BNP has a note of dissent. So why is that happening?
I think this is a bit misinterpreted.
Okay.
Yeah. We remain stuck to the main proposition that we gave, where we said in the constitutional bodies, let's say Election Commission, Human Rights Commission, we proposed all-party parliamentary committee, through which the appointments will be done via vetting. We still abide by that. We have no
you're
change.
okay.
We still are saying we need to have an all-party parliamentary committee, and all these constitutional positions must go through an all-party parliamentary committee vetting. No change in our position.
Okay. So how is that different from what, because in the Consensus Commission, your note of dissent is...
The Consensus Commission has come up with a proposal where there will be non-elected bodies in the decision-making process as well.
That's your objection.
We are saying for these constitutional bodies, there should be a consensus among elected bodies.
Okay.
No non-elected participants. So that's the difference.
If the formation of the committee changes, then BNP will agree to that.
We have nothing to agree. This is done based on our proposal.
Okay, all right.
So agreement is there in terms of what we need to do. Disagreement is there, how we're going to do. The what question we have answered long time back. The how question we differ. And that's the beauty of democracy.
Now, Dr. Jackman, you're hearing all about this. I want to ask you two questions. The first thing is, when we are talking, and you have talked about the reform in the party finance and others, and it looks like there has not necessarily been, there is probably agreement on principle to do that, but, in terms of operationalizing that in the, not only in the formal rules, but the informal rules, there will always be challenges to that. How can we make sure that, the societal forces or civil society organizations can play a role, regarding that to make sure this happen? And just a quick second question is, at the same time, as Dr. Tasnim Jara was talking about, that in case of reform, we have eventually failed to incorporate citizens within the discussions. It was largely, in our case, it was largely a elite-driven, process. So based on your experience, if you really want to make reforms more citizen-driven or citizen-controlled, what is the pathway? What can be done regarding that?
Let me start with the second one. I think when I travel around Bangladesh and speak to people, I think one of the greatest things that people value is stability. They want stability to their jobs, with their businesses. They don't want to see violence on the streets. So my honest perspective is that the primary goal of the people of Bangladesh is probably for something good to come from all of this process. And whether and if and how and the extent to which people's voices are included in that process is probably secondary to the outcomes. That's my interpretation.
Now, so Dr. Jara, I want to come back to you because I was wondering whether I can take one or two questions from the audience. But before moving into that, I know that NCP has introduced a crowdfunding. So it looks like there is a different way of thinking about party finance, and also you talked about a collective leadership within the party. So can you tell a little bit more about that, and how do you think that will, what type of change that is bringing within the, we always sort of talk about new politics from NCP, and that has always been the main focus of NCP. So what are the changes that we're bringing through them?
Thank you. So yes, we are trying a model of collective leadership, and we have a very vibrant convening committee which debates on issues, which debates on how we are going to expand into the country, and nobody is above question in our party. So we are trying to follow due process, democratic practices, and also, like Dr. Jackman mentioned, that political finance is a big issue, and we are trying out different models to make sure that we don't wade into the old politics and old policies, but actually we remain transparent. I think we would need, again, a cross-party consensus on how we approach the problem of political finance. If it's just NCP trying to do things differently, unfortunately, that wouldn't change how things are run in the country, and the problem will probably still remain at large at scale. So again, we would like the process of reform. We would need cross-party consensus, at least first admitting the problem that there is a problem in political finance in how political parties are run, and that creates a lot of problems in terms of the rent-seeking and extortion and corruption within the structures of the state. If we can admit to that, and if there's a cross-partisan effort on correcting that, I think that would be the right course of action. And it's it wouldn't be enough for only NCP to address this. But we have started doing that. We are trying to test out different models on party financing, and hopefully we would have cross-partisan support on making sure that political finance is not run how it has been.
All right, very quick question, two quick questions. One to Dr. Amin and one to Tasnim Jara. If I have heard you correctly, you're saying that the July Shanod, after completion, I don't know what is the completion here, meaning of completion, done, you will take it to the people through election and let people decide. That's what you said?
In the areas where it differ.
Yeah, then, yeah, fine, okay, but that's what's going to happen. That's given. That's what we can see now with all the dissent and everything on the fundamental issues, okay? Now, so why are you still meeting? Why the meeting is going on? What is the point? We can shut it tomorrow. That's my question. And to you, you heard him, so what's NCP is going to do now?
Should I answer first? I think over 90% of the issues we all agree. There are over 1,000 altogether, the proposals, the areas we're debating. Over 90% there's clear major agreement. Only in some areas, in some methodology, we differ. And that's the beauty of democracy. I think if we don't have the tolerance to ensure and appreciate coexistence, that's another form of authoritarianism. We should appreciate this diversity, we should appreciate the tolerance, and we should all sit and talk. Going out, leaving the meeting, that's not the solution. Talking, discussing, that's the solution. That's the spirit of New Bangladesh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mizabhay, for the question. I think to respond to what Dr. Amin said and the previous discussion, I think it's a bit risky to paint reform as a vague and abstract process, because we have been going through a very structured format on how reforms are going to take place and how they are going to be implemented. Unfortunately, hope is not a very good implementation plan, and we need clear pathways and structured timeline on how the reforms are going to be implemented. So from NCP, what we've said is, for the commission reports which are not under the purview of the Consensus Commission, there must be clear timelines for clear timelines and clear implementation pathways for those commission reports and recommendations. And for the Consensus Commission recommendations as well, there must be a clear implementation plan, and it should not just be, again, another paper which is not followed through, because we have seen that before, and this uprising must also not go in vain. There must be a clear implementation plan for these reforms, and what we are saying is the most sustainable way of incorporating these reforms is through a constituent assembly. The next election, if it has the status of a constituent assembly, then that is a more sustainable way of incorporating those changes into the constitution. Because although Dr. Amin is saying we have agreed on 90% of reforms, it's not a question about how many reforms, but it is about the quality of those reforms. It is about which changes are we agreeing to. Are we agreeing to the changes that would alter the concentration of power at the top that has led time and again of capturing power of the state, politicizing all institutions, and robbing citizens of their rights to even speak? Am I agreeing to changing that? If I am not, if I am agreeing to 99 other changes, it doesn't really matter. Thank you.
So I can take one more question if there's any.
My question is mostly to Dr. Mahdi Amin. It's about the democratic models. For example, in the advanced democracies of Europe, especially, we know that the people do politics, especially the politicians at various levels, because they get a lot of honor and reputation, and financially they get bare minimum to sustain themselves. So someone doing politics in, for example, UK, at a local level or parliamentary level, he or she knows that I'll get a due amount of honor,
so can you
but
please
financially,
come to the question?
financially I'll be able to sustain myself. So in Bangladesh context, what do you think the motivation of doing politics? Now, BNP has got 6 million or...
So that's the question. What's the motivation of doing
what
politics?
is the motivation of politics of BNP supporters? Will they be expecting some government contracts after BNP coming to power, or they will be content with honor? Thank you.
All right. I think Professor Jackman will also be interested to hear that answer.
I think the first motivation is that there will be no more enforced disappearances, there will be no more murders, there will be no more fake cases. The freedom to live in a free country, that's the first motivation. And the second is, of course, an opportunity to serve the country in respective capacities. We need to create a culture where it's not just about MPs. You don't need to be a parliamentarian to serve the country. If you have the patriotism, if you have democratic values, from your respective position, as long as we have the rule of law, human rights, freedom of expression in the country, everyone can contribute. Thank you.
Just one very quick thing to highlight at the end, I think. If the objective, of course, is to build a stable, prosperous Bangladesh, then serious attention needs to be given to rebuilding the security apparatus, the domestic security agencies, in a way that can contain the political violence that is so typically seen in Bangladesh.
Dr. Tasnim.
Just a few last points. I think we have talked about how the reforms that would ensure there is no concentration of power at the top, there have been areas of disappointment there, but two areas that I feel that our reform charter has failed is our women and the youth. So for women who we have seen leading the uprising from the front, it's very disappointing that the parties could not come to a consensus and only said 5%, which is the status quo. And also, I think it has failed the youth. Although it's a young country, we must have a structure for incorporating youth in our politics. That has not been addressed. And lastly, on the implementation plan, I think we need a public reform dashboard with clear timelines, named owners, and automaticity clauses. If X does not happen by date Y, something must change. If we are not changing the rules, we are getting the same outcome. So we must make sure that this has tangible outcome, tangible plans, so that no leader can bend the rules in the next decade.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. And, special thanks to Dr. Mahdi Amin, because, I kind of forced you to stay there. And I hope that this tendency will continue even after the election ends, whoever comes into power and everything. But thanks. I think we had, if we could talk some more about more of the reform proposals, it would have been better. But we are running out of time. I think we got some idea about, some changes which may or may not happen. And let's see how things move forward. At that point, we just simply can wait and see and how things move. With that, thanks a lot to Dr. Mahdi Amin, Dr. David Jackman, Dr. Tasnim Jara, and this is how this session ends. Thank you.